Hello, I'm Shigeki Yamaguchi, Senior Executive Vice President of NTT Data Corporation, and also CEO of NTT Data Institute of Management Consulting. In Japan, I have published 3 books on how digital technology changes the economy, management, and society. Currently, our main focus is assisting our clients with their digital transformation effort. We firmly believe that this transformative journey is crucial for organizations to thrive in the digital age. To ensure we stay at the forefront of knowledge and innovation, we actively engaged in global research initiatives, examining advanced digital transformation best practices worldwide. By doing so, we aim to gain invaluable insight and foresight that can be applied to help our clients achieve their strategic objectives. I haven't mentioned digital technology impact on global strategy before. Today, I would like to focus on global strategy in digital era. How to re-envision a global strategy in digital multinational environment, which is one of the key concerns for executives. Around 2 decades ago, Thomas Friedman's influential book, The World is Flat, gained traction in Japan. It propagated the notion that the advancement in information technology would erase geographical barriers, enabling optimized production and sales on a global scale. In reality, however, the impact of international relations, trade regulations, cultural and geographic constraints remains significant. Moreover, the current international political climate has led to economic divisions and heightened tensions. In light of these complexities, it becomes imperative for organizations to consider not only economic factors, but also the political landscape when contemplating global expansion. On the technology side, the rapid advancement in digital technology have surpassed even our boldest prediction from 2 decades ago. Technologies such as AI, IoT, cloud, and virtual reality have progressed at an unprecedented pace, reshaping the landscape of our society and economy. As I have categorized these technologies into 4 categories: algorithm, connect, combat, and cognize. When these technologies synergize and intertwine, they inevitably generate profound impact on society and the economy as a whole. The advancement in digital technology have significant impact on traditional large corporations in terms of management, business process, technology, and talent. The leaders and the executives of these companies are required to understand this impact and leverage it. Please allow me to share some intriguing data that shed light on the current landscape. The yellow color represents the total value of overseas acquisition made by Japanese companies. Despite the complexities of the global environment, Japanese companies have actively engaged in overseas acquisition over the past 2 decades. Now, we find ourselves at a crucial turning point. It is imperative for us to harness the power of digital technology to re-evaluate our global strategies in the face of economic divisions. In the midst of this challenge, I stumbled upon a fascinating book that proposes an intriguing concept. Digital technology possesses the dual forces of both globalization and localization. It explores how we can effectively construct a global strategy by leveraging the capabilities of digital technology. I am excited to introduce a remarkable book titled The Digital Multinational, authored by Dr. Sateesh Nambisan and published in 2022. He is Nancy and Joseph Keys Professor of Technology Management at the Weatherhead School of Management, Case Western Reserve University. He is widely recognized as a prominent researcher and thought leader in the field of innovation management, entrepreneurship, and global business strategy. This book describes how multinational companies can use digital technology to compete in a world where business is driven by the forces of both globalization and localization. I believe that this book is very helpful for executives to practically implement their company's global strategy in this complex digital world. Thank you for your time, Sateesh-san. It's been great to see you again. Please, Sateesh-san.
Thank you. Thank you. Good morning, Yamaguchi-san. Thank you for inviting me to be part of this discussion of the book. I think as you were just talking about Tom Friedman's book on The World is Flat, I'm reminded how digital technology and the context of global business has changed.
Thank you, Sateesh-san. So let's get started with the conversation right away. Today, I'd like to proceed with this agenda to understand the concept of the digital multinational. In this book, Sateesh-san explains a practical framework that allows organizations to devise and deploy a comprehensive and coherent set of global business strategies that are founded on digital technology capabilities and suited to different international market contexts. To understand the concept of your book deeply, I would like to explore in detail of these topics, which I am often asked by executives of my client companies. Let us now delve into the captivating topic of the emerging business context for multinationals. Sateesh-san, I'm eager to understand the motivation behind your book. Why did you choose to explore this subject? In your book, you make a compelling argument. What is driving this new rapid upward trajectory in globalization? The short answer is digitization. Advances in digital technologies have forged new pathways to bind different parts of the world, new information pathways, thereby inaugurating a new era in globalization, digital globalization. Could you please explain in detail the reason behind this idea?
So let me just take if we go to the next slide, we will see that, what is the context in which this book was written. I want to sort of talk a little bit about the motivation for writing the book, which you alluded. You will see that, really, it's the context for multinationals. Most multinationals is a very interesting context where, on the one hand, we are all digitally connected. And on the other hand, like you just mentioned, it's geopolitically fragmented. So let me just first talk a little bit about this, digital connectivity and how it has helped. We have over 1,000 years of history of globalization, right? And in the last century, if you just look back in the last century, we made big advances in terms of lots of innovations. For example, international communications, transatlantic cables, international shipping containers, institutions were like World Trade Organizations. All of these helped enhance the number of multinationals. So there's a very interesting statistic that I want to share. In the 1960s, there were around 7,000 multinationals in the world. And in the next 30 years or so, by 2000, it had just increased up to 38,000 multinationals. But the next 15 years, which is when the digital technology really exploded, it tripled to more than 100,000 multinationals. So, in a way, we see that what we wrote about in the book as globalization on steroids because of digital technology. It allows us to increase the portability of our business models and processes and products. It's pretty agnostic to geopolitical boundaries, national boundaries, and political boundaries, or geographic boundaries. It's very easy to scale digital business models. So all of these factors have, I think, contributed to a place where the pace of globalization is significantly increased. And another statistic is just to compare, if you take Marriott, the hotel chain, and compare it with the Airbnb, right? So Marriott, it took around 70 years for them to expand to around 130 countries, 70 years. And Airbnb expanded to 190 countries in less than 10 years. So you find that technology enables companies to expand rapidly, enhances global footprint. So that's what we are seeing on the left-hand side. And that's going to continue, right? We are going to have more and more technologies, like you just mentioned. AI, IoT, all of these are going to enhance the connectivity. On the other side is where the interesting things are happening, which is, we are living in a world where we have lots of geopolitical issues. Yeah. Not just the most dominant one would be between the US and the China. But that's not it. We have issues between US and EU. For example, just a few days back, Facebook got a big sanction from EU for cross-border data flow. So we find that there are all these concerns, security concerns, national security concerns. All of these are coming up, and different countries are moving in different directions, and globalization is being affected. So while we may not have reached a deglobalization, we are somewhere in between, where we have all these new frictions to global business. And so that I think is a very interesting context, where digital technology removes all the frictions, and geopolitical issues creates new frictions. Multinationals have to navigate this. And I think that's the really context for our book. So, if you just go to the next slide, we see that we started writing this in around 2000, and we found that the real challenge for most multinational CEOs and senior managers and senior executives is to really exploit or leverage the capabilities of digital technologies, but at the same time adapt to all these tensions in a dynamic way, because we don't know what's going to happen tomorrow. So it's not, it's very, very flexible and rapidly changing scenario. And so the goal of this book was to answer this particular question: how can digital technologies be used to adapt to markets, adapt to different types of localization forces? I think that is something which we haven't seen, where we bring together ideas from digital technologies and ideas on geopolitical issues and see what impact it has for global strategy of businesses.
Thank you for highlighting the significance of digital technology in facilitating global expansion and partnerships. I agree with the notion that the companies can no longer rely solely on copying and pasting business strategies into foreign markets, but instead must embrace horizontal, tailored to each country's unique environment. Now, let us proceed to our second topic, developing a strategy to navigate the complex global business landscape. As I mentioned, talking about a global strategy, I think we need to change our strategy depending on country's context. On the other hand, too much localization runs the risk of siloing our strategy. So I have two questions. My first question is how do we assess the need for localization in each market? And the second question is, how do we balance globalization and localization in our global strategy? Could you kindly share your ideas, Saty-san?
Sure. So, you hit on the real issue here, which is context matters, right? Yeah. So if you are a company like Unilever, which I used to work for a long time back, Unilever has presence in more than 190 countries. It's very difficult for somebody sitting in one place, let's say whether it is London or Mumbai, to think about how, what is the real issue in a market which is far distant from them. But it is imperative that we understand what kind of global context we operate in. So we, offer a very simple instrument that executives can use to sort of evaluate to the extent of globalization and localization forces that are operating in different parts of the world. So let's say that you have a significant presence in South Asia, right? Maybe that is a big market for you, South Asia. So you can take South Asia as a big market and see, as this instrument shows, we have three parts of this. One is policies, the other is infrastructure, and the third is culture. So policies, for example, to what extent does it, the government policies and regulations help or hinder entry into new markets or competition? How does it regulate cross-border data flows? For example, we just mentioned EU, right? EU has much more stringent regulations than the US when it comes to cross-border data flows. So you find that you have to think about how it is, all these are different in different places. Policies relate to IP, which is very, very important for most multinationals, especially when you are in the tech area. Policies related to collaboration with companies in the local market. So those are policies. And then another key part is infrastructure, not just the business infrastructure and the innovation infrastructure, but importantly, access to digital communication and data infrastructures. Now, you find that in some countries, they are sort of regulated extensively that, and so you cannot take into, you have to take into consideration these different access policies. It also relates to standards in digital infrastructure, whether they adhere to global standards or there are native standards. Finally, culture is a very important factor. So culture, local partners, when you have alliances, joint ventures and alliances, culture of the local employees, as well as consumer culture, which is another big part, right? To what extent it is a global consumer culture? Is it localized consumer culture? So this, around 12 items here, which you see, is a very good snapshot. It provides a snapshot of the extent of globalization and localized forces in a particular market. So I would presume that if you have, let's say, 3 different big markets, one in South Asia and one in, let's say, EU, one part of EU, and then maybe there's something else in Australia, then you have to think about, you do use this instrument to evaluate in these 3 markets. And this is not, you're trying to bring some discipline, but the point is not to be so accurate. Nobody can be accurate. It's still subjective evaluation, but it provides a good metric for us to start off that. So that, I think, and sort of answers your first question as to, we have to do that. Context matters, so you have to understand the context.
Yeah.
So going back to your next question, if you can just move ahead to the next slide, we find that we looked at, so what is interesting is traditionally multinationals have a headquarters, and they develop strategies, global strategies, and then they tell their subsidiaries to do this and hit this and that gets translated into action, right, in different markets. So that is a sort of a command and control. And in some cases, we find that that's not going to work because the local market is different from what the headquarters had originally thought about. So this idea about loose coupling actually comes from computer software. If you have written a program, you find that, you want to write software where if you have different modules, they are all not too interdependent, so that if you make a change in one, it doesn't create a ripple effect in all the other parts of the software, right? It's the same idea that we can apply to organizations, to multinationals. So if you think about multinationals as, organization, then you have partners in the ecosystem, you have suppliers, and you have subsidiaries in different parts of the world. So you want to have, when there is lots of globalization evident in some parts of the world, then you can achieve efficiency. You can achieve optimization. You can have more optimal operations. So that's where tight coupling comes in, that you are tightly coupled in different parts of this organization. You have, a global template, so to speak, of operation, how things should be done, and that can be implemented at all the places. So you're actually enhancing your efficiency, productivity, cost savings, everything. On the other hand, if there is a lot more localization in a particular market, then that's not going to work. So then you have to have loosely coupled, where we provide more autonomy to the local subsidiaries to change those global templates in a way that fits with their market. Right? I think that is the sort of, in principle, that's a concept that can be applied. So what is new now is the advances that you just mentioned about in technologies like IoT, AI, and cloud computing. All of these have allowed us to realize loose coupling, which 10 or 15 years back, it may not have been possible. So that's really, technology allows us to have both tight coupling and loose coupling as based on how much globalization and localization is evident in a market. So if there is a lot of globalization in one part of the world, then you have tight coupling there. When you have more localization in one part of the world, you have loose coupling. So this is, so what we did was we looked at 4 dimensions of multinationals connectivity. In connectivity with the global customers and markets, connectivity with operations in subsidiaries and connectivity with subsidiaries, connectivity with resources, whether it is knowledge resources, innovation partners, resources, and finally with your external partners, ecosystem partners. And so within each, we have described in our book different aspects of each of these 4 dimensions. So for example, let me just take one. If you take global customers, you find that connectivity in terms of channels, like whether it is digital channel or physical channel by which you reach customers, and also brands. connectivity in terms of the brand and the customer, whether it is a global branding or is it a localized branding.
Yeah.
And all of these can be enhanced or facilitated through digital technologies, right? And so you can mix and match these nature of connectivity via digital technology with by looking at what is actually needed in terms of globalization, localization forces. So I'll take a couple of examples. One example that we did in operations is actually platforms. Bayer is a multinational which actually bought Monsanto Corporation a long time back, and along with it, they got a subsidiary called Climate Corporation, which has the digital agricultural or digital farming software platform called FieldView. And so that is something which allows farmers to download data and manage their crop in different ways. Very, very helpful to enhance the productivity of farmers. So it has been implemented, that platform has been implemented in the North America as well as in some parts of EU. When they actually took this platform to India, they found that there are localization forces that don't really allow for this platform to work there for several reasons. One is that infrastructure in terms of connectivity, right? Wireless connectivity. The power of the most farmers were small landholders. And so the power of the smartphone they used were much less. And so lots of factors, local factors prevented them from. So what they did was they reimagined that platform for the Indian context and called, they created an app called Farm Rice, I'm sorry. And so they took some as digital parts of the platform they had and then added a few other things and created a new app. So you find that you have to look at what are the local forces, and digital technologies allows us to modify, take some assets, modify them, and apply that in different parts of the world. And I think that's one part. The other example that is in operations is from Philips, or maybe even Unilever has lots of factories where they use digital twins. And the idea here is that you can have a digital twin of your factory operations, and you can feed the data that is actually localized data in real time to run simulations and see what is the best operations plan. So what is important here is, where do you push your intelligence? Do you want to make all decision-making intelligence at the edge of your operations, or is it a hubs, right? The more globalized, the more you can centralize this decision-making. You can bring it to the regional hubs. The more local forces operate, you need to push it to the edge of the network or edge of your operations. And digital technology allows both. And so this is where technology allows both, facilitates both globalized operations in globalized parts of the world, as well as when it is more localized. And I think that's what we go through each of these dimensions and talk about how technology facilitates in different ways you can accomplish that.
Thank you for your explanation of the framework and its potential in guiding the creation of a systematic global strategy that effectively balances localization and globalization. Next, let's move on the topic of new risks for multinationals. While we have explored the opportunities and capabilities of the digital multinational environment thus far, it is essential to acknowledge the dark side that accompanies it. In my global business experience, I have dealt with regulatory risks such as GDPR regarding information protection, the risk of cyber attacks, and supply chain risk due to pandemics. As a global company, what risks should we consider? Could you share your ideas about this topic?
Sure. So I think at the outset, I would say that digital technologies introduces new types of risks.
Yeah.
And also at the same time, it increases the contagion effect. Something happens in some part of the world that whether it is cyber threat or whatever it is, that travels very fast and affects all the other parts of the company, extremely fast. So the speed with which negative events affect company operations is significantly increased because of technology. So let me just talk about this new types of risk. I think the first type is what we call as the cross-border interdependence risk. So when you have subsidiaries in different parts of the world, or whether you have partners in different parts of the world, you find that you have to take data from one part of the world and move it around to affect or help operations in other part of the world. Now, see, these data flows are increasingly heavily regulated these days. And those regulations are actually happening as we speak, right? EU is coming up with lots of regulations. And like I just mentioned, they sanctioned Facebook a few days back based on the EU's cross-border data flows regulations. So you find that that's something which is very, very important risk for multinationals. And whether it can be predicted, to what extent it can be anticipated is an open question, because many countries are actually learning, and as they learn, they change their policies and regulations related to these issues. The second, I would say, the kind of risk is security risk. So now you have lots of new security risk, privacy, cyber threats, and these, again, policies are coming up. So there are two parts. One is that there are new laws and policies coming up. For example, in India, there is a consumer data privacy law that is coming up. As in Australia, there has a new one, especially related to health data. And so you find that consumer data privacy issues are becoming very important across the world. And these actually pose important challenges to multinationals, because when you have global markets, you are taking data from different parts of the world about consumers and tailoring your marketing strategies based on that. And that requires getting data from one place to another place. And you have to adhere to all these regulations and policies. Reputations, that is another one, which as I mentioned, it's a contagion risk. Suppose you have a partner in one part of the world, and that particular partner has, some because of some cyber threat, the loss of data is going to affect your reputation, and that has a big impact on your, your overall operations. Again, fraud and all these other issues related to data are not limited to organizational boundaries. If something happens to your partner, you're going to get affected because you are digitally connected to that partner. And this becomes more important when we have implemented IoT, for example, across partners, across organizations. So are you taking care of those kinds of risks? Are you evaluating them? How do you evaluate your partner's capabilities, right? All these are important risks. Another risk is institutional infrastructural risk. So we talked a little bit back about access to infrastructure. Now, this has become very important. For example, China recently, passed a new regulation, critical infrastructure policies, where Chinese regulators, government regulators, will have a big say in how multinationals, use the infrastructure and change data from one place to another place. I think those are important because you need to have access to infrastructure in different parts of the world. And if they are siloed infrastructure, then it becomes very difficult for a multinational to operate in an efficient manner. Finally, we have new global rivals, and these are what we call as micro multinationals, or companies that are using these platforms to compete in a very, very nimble and flexible way. So you find that these, again, is a important risk for large multinational companies, because the platforms make, the sort of levels the field for different players, and cost of operations goes down for small players, and then becomes very easy for them to access foreign markets. So I think both there are new types of risk and the intensity of existing risk are also increasing. So I think that's a big challenge for multinationals to evaluate, monitor, and manage those risks.
Thank you for acknowledging the importance of evaluating global business risks and appropriately managing critical risks. It is indeed crucial to strike a balance between globalization and localization as organizations navigate their path towards becoming multinational companies. So let's move on the last topic, leadership for multinationals. In the case of NTT Data, with a significant portion of overseas revenue exceeding 60%, we are actively working towards achieving that multinational status. Based on our practical experience, we have recognized the integration of knowledge, research and development, and back office operations on a global scale, while emphasizing the need for localized leadership in customer care and sales to cater to regional context. We also recognize the importance of a common vision and rules of governance in order to lead an organization globally. Could you give us some advice on the leadership needed for global business?
Sure. So I think the first, when we were talking with the senior executives in doing research for our book, the first thing we came across was that successful multinational executives who are, able to adapt to globalization, localization forces. First, one big difference was that they had a broader horizon in looking at the organization. There was an perspective ecosystem. Rather than just looking at their own organizations, they were looking at their partners and everybody else within that ecosystem. So that ecosystem perspective, I think, is the first important part, that they are in partnership with a number of other companies, and they have to take care of, and they are all digitally connected with one another. And you have to think about how everybody gets affected by all these technologies and globalization, localization forces. So I think that has implications on, understanding how much decision-making power is given to your subsidiaries, to your partners, how much actual collaboration, joint decision-making you engage in with your partners. And I think that all of that has to be very, very important. So that is one part. The second part is, related to that is having a very inclusive vision. So for value creation, which means that you can set, if you are the CEO or a senior executive for multinationals, you can set up a global strategy. That is fine. But then that is the broad framework for others to play. And that may be changed. And you have to give enough latitude for your partners as well as subsidiaries to change it and adapt it to wherever they are actually executing it. And I think that requires changes in culture of the organization, how it communicates with its partners, how it communicates with subsidiaries, in roles. For example, we have seen that in some organizations like Johnson Controls used to have a one executive who was responsible for both digital and marketing. Likewise for Unilever has a commercial and digital, the chief leader for digital and commercial is one person. So you find that when you bring together, because digital has to be embedded into all these things. So you need to have leaders who can incorporate both ideas. And I think that's very important. So I would say changes in structure, changes in roles, organizational structure and roles is important part of the equation.
Thank you for the excellent presentation. I have come to realize that the challenges for leaders today in digital multinational world is to be able to do both of globalization and localization and shift between one and the other, depending on the need in that moment, the context. I also understood that it is the role of executives to lead many stakeholders by devising and communication an inclusive vision for value creation in international environment. Now, let me share one of our similar ideas for references. On this slide, we have presented our framework for future organizational management. As you explained, leaders in digital multinational envision and lead the company by aligning globalization and localization. Additionally, to successfully grow business in digital eras, leaders must be effectively align traditional and digital business organizations. Essentially, effective leadership entails combining mindsets across 4 dimensions: global and local, traditional and digital. To foster this kind of management approach, a shared vision and an organizational culture that encourages continuous learning are paramount. I believe that it is necessary for this kind of management to have a common vision and an organizational culture of continuing to learn. Thank you for the excellent discussion based on the digital multinational. Through our dialogue, we have gained a deeper understanding of the theoretical concept presented in the book, enabling us to grasp the intricacies of navigating the digital landscape. In closing, I would like to invite you to share a message and offer some advice to business leaders in Japan. Please.
Sure. I think the fundamental thing is digital technology is finally a tool, and it is a tool that can be used.
Yeah, tool. Yeah.
You need to have a understanding of the context, which is a starting point, and you need to have a strategy, a global strategy to adapt to the different tensions. Technology becomes useful to implement that strategy. And another part is what we call as a duality of the digital. Technology can be used, digital technologies can be used to, like I said, enhance efficiency, optimize operations. At the same time, it can also be used to increase your strategic and operational flexibility, right? So it's like 2 sides of the same coin. One side is flexibility and more adaptiveness. The other side is more efficiency and optimal. Technology can be used in both ways. It's understanding where you need to apply. I think that's where the contextual knowledge comes in. And I think that's a real challenge for multinationals, to understand the context in which they operate.
Thank you. Thank you for a good discussion. Thank you.
Thank you, Yamaguchi-san.